Hello there, and welcome to Deep Earth Stories. Get comfortable, turn the lights down if you can. Because what we are about to explore together has been waiting a very, very long time for someone to listen. But before that, tell me in comments where are you listening from and what time is there right now, and please subscribe to my channel. Tonight, we are going to go somewhere very far away. Not far in miles. Not far across a road or a country or an ocean you could cross in a plane. We are going somewhere far in time. Far beneath the surface of things. Far beneath the water, beneath the silence, beneath the centuries. If you are lying down right now, good. Let your body sink a little deeper into wherever you are resting. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw go soft. You do not need to hold anything tightly tonight. Maybe you have the lights off. Maybe there is just a small glow somewhere near you, a phone screen, a lamp turned low, a little bit of light coming under the door. Whatever it is, let it be soft. Let it be distant. Tonight, we're going to talk about cities that were swallowed by water, civilizations that were once alive, full of people walking through markets, children laughing near rivers, fires burning in hearths, music drifting through narrow streets. And then, slowly, or sometimes not so slowly, the water came. And they were gone. This is not a frightening story. I want you to know that right away. Yes, it is a story about things being lost. But it is also a story about how deep the world is, how much history is sleeping just beneath the surface, how time moves in long, slow waves that we can barely feel when we are standing inside them. Take a breath with me now. Slow and easy. In through your nose and out through your mouth. Good. We are in no hurry here. The world has been changing for a very long time. Long before you were born, long before anyone alive today took their first breath, the sea level was rising and falling like the chest of something enormous sleeping. Ice was building up at the poles, locking away water, pulling the oceans lower. Then the ice would melt, the water would return, and the edges of the land would disappear beneath the waves. This has happened many times, over and over. Slowly, always slowly, a metre here, a metre there, over centuries and centuries. And the people who lived at the edges of the land, the ones who built their homes near the water because the water gave them fish and trade and travel, those people sometimes had to move. Sometimes they moved in time. Sometimes they did not. And so the ocean floor in many places around the world is not empty sand and rock. It is full of quiet things, stone walls, broken pottery, the foundations of buildings that once had roofs and windows and families inside them. That is what we are going to visit tonight. Slowly, gently, like a diver who goes down only a little at a time, pausing to breathe, pausing to look around, pausing to feel the weight of all that water above. Are your eyes getting heavy? That is perfectly fine. You do not need to see this journey, you only need to hear it. Let the words come to you like water, soft and surrounding, and let your mind drift where it wants to drift. Let me ask you something simple. What if everything we call ancient history is only a small part of the real story? Think about that for a moment. The oldest civilizations we learnt about in school, the ones we know by name, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, they are roughly 5,000 to 6,000 years old. 5,000 years feels like a very long time. It is a long time for a human mind to hold. But here is the quiet truth. Human beings have been human beings for at least 200,000 years. Some scientists say even longer. We had language, fire, cooperation, and the capacity for art and building for tens of thousands of years before the places we call the first civilizations appeared. So what were people doing for all that time before? Some of them were living in places that no longer exist, places that are now under the sea. And that is where our story begins. Chapter 1. The World Before the Flood. Imagine you are standing on a beach, but not any beach that exists today. This beach is 20,000 years ago. The air smells the same, salt and wind and something ancient in the back of your throat. The waves are there, the same colour, the same sound, that low, even roar that has always been the sea. But the shoreline is very different. You are standing on land that today is 60 metres underwater. Maybe more. During the last great ice age, which scientists call the last glacial maximum, so much water was frozen in the polar ice caps that sea levels around the world were dramatically lower than they are now. Some estimates say the sea was about 120 metres lower than today. 120 metres. That is not a small difference. That is the height of a 40-storey building. That is enough to expose millions of square kilometres of land that are now covered in ocean. The English Channel between England and France? Dry land. You could walk from one country to the other. People did. The North Sea between Britain and Scandinavia? Largely dry. There was a vast flat region of marshes and forests there that researchers now call Doggerland. It was rich with animals and fish and edible plants, and people lived there for thousands of years. The Persian Gulf? Almost entirely dry. A great river valley running between what is now Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, with a few lakes and the slow green gleam of fresh water in the distance. The waters around Southeast Asia, what we now call the South China Sea and the Java Sea, shallow enough that a huge landmass connected many of the islands. Scientists call this Sunderland, and it was enormous, bigger than modern India. People lived there, moved through it, built their lives on it. And then the ice started to melt. Not all at once. This was not a disaster movie. It was slow, the way everything geological is slow. Over thousands of years the ice sheets retreated. The meltwater flowed down rivers, into seas, and the oceans began to rise. At first the change was barely noticeable. A little higher each century, a little more water in the bay, the beaches shifting back year by year. But then, around 11 or 12,000 years ago, the melting accelerated. There were periods called meltwater pulses, moments in geological time when the ice collapsed much more quickly and the sea level rose faster. Researchers estimate that during some of these pulses, sea levels may have risen by several metres within just a few centuries. That is fast enough for people to notice. Fast enough for people to remember. Some researchers believe this is where many of the world's flood myths come from. Every culture, almost without exception, has a story about a great flood. The story of Noah in the Bible. Utnapishtim in the ancient Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, which is older than the Bible by thousands of years. The Hindu story of Manu, who was warned by a fish to build a great boat before the waters came. The Greek story of Deucalion and Pyrrha. The flood stories of indigenous peoples in Australia, in South America, in North America, across Africa and Asia. So many different cultures, so many different places, all with a memory of water rising and covering the land. Could they all be remembering the same thing? Maybe. Probably not one single event, but rather the long, slow experience of coastal flooding that humans lived through over thousands of years as the Ice Age ended and the sea levels. Rose. Imagine living near the coast for generations, your grandparents' fishing from the same beach, and slowly, over your lifetime and your children's lifetime, the water coming closer. Old landmarks disappearing under waves, villagers having to move inland, stories being passed down about the land that was lost, the places that are now beneath the sea. Those stories would travel, they would change as they moved from culture to culture, from century to century. They would grow larger in the telling. But somewhere inside them, buried like a stone foundation under centuries of silt, there might be a real memory of real water rising over real land where real people lived. For a moment, just breathe. Notice your breath moving in and out. Notice how quiet it is where you are. You are safe here. You are warm. The water we are talking about rose slowly over thousands of years. There is no urgency in this story. There is only time, slow and deep. Let us drift a little further. Chapter 2. Doggerland, the Lost Country. Let me paint you a picture. It is 8,000 years ago. You are standing in a forest, soft light coming down through oak trees, the smell of damp earth and leaves under your feet. Somewhere nearby, a river is moving. You can hear it, that steady low sound of water over smooth stones. Birds are calling back and forth above you, their voices echoing in the canopy. This is Doggerland. It does not look like what we think of when we think of Northern Europe today. There are no grey skies full of rain, no cold, empty coastlines. This is a warm, lush, green land, recovering from the Ice Age, alive with wildlife. Red deer move between the trees, wild horses graze on the open meadows near the water. The rivers are full of salmon, the skies in summer are long and golden, and there are people here. Mesolithic people, which means people of the Middle Stone Age, hunter-gatherers who knew this land the way you know your own neighbourhood. They knew where the deer drank in the evening. They knew which roots were good to eat in winter. They knew the paths between the forests, the best places to fish, the high ground where you could see for miles in every direction. This land is now under the North Sea. The Doggerbank, a shallow underwater ridge between Britain and the Netherlands, is one of the highest points of what used to be Doggerland. Today it sits about 15 to 30 metres below the surface, and it is a rich fishing area. When fishing boats drag their nets across its floor, they sometimes pull up objects that do not belong to the ocean. Bones of woolly mammoths, teeth of rhinoceroses, stone tools that were shaped by human hands. In 1931, a fishing boat called the Kalinda was trawling in the North Sea, roughly 25 miles east of the Norfolk coast of England. When the crew hauled in their nets, they found something unexpected. A lump of peat, the kind of compressed ancient plant matter that forms in boggy land, and embedded in that peat was a harpoon point, made from antler bone, shaped carefully and deliberately by human hands. Scientists dated it. It was roughly 11,000 years old. Someone had been hunting in that spot when it was dry land. They had lost their harpoon, perhaps in a river or a bog. The bog had preserved it in its dark, airless embrace for 11,000 years, and then the North Sea had let it go, one February day in 1931, to be pulled up into a fishing boat by accident. That harpoon point is now in a museum. It sits in a glass case, and it is very small and very old, and when you look at it, you are looking at a ghost. An artifact from a country that no longer exists. In recent decades, researchers have become very interested in Doggerland. Advances in sonar technology mean that ships can map the seafloor in great detail, seeing the shapes of ancient river valleys and lakes beneath the sediment. And what they are finding is extraordinary. The seafloor of the North Sea still holds the shapes of Doggerland's geography. The old river channels are still there, the old hills and valleys are still there, buried under sediment, but intact enough to read, like writing under a coat of paint. There was a great river, now called the ancestral Thames Rhine, that flowed through the middle of Doggerland and eventually emptied into the Atlantic somewhere far to the north. Several smaller rivers fed into it. The land around these rivers would have been incredibly productive, the kind of place where early humans could thrive. And some researchers believe they did thrive. They believe Doggerland may have been one of the most densely populated areas of Mesolithic Europe. Not densely in the way a modern city is dense, but rich with human life by the standards of that time. Bands of hunters and gatherers moving through seasons, following animals, trading with neighbouring groups, building the first fragile threads of what would eventually become. Human civilization, all of it is gone now. Slowly covered. Slowly drowned. The sea rising centimetre by centimetre over centuries, until one day there was no more Doggerland. Only the North Sea, grey and deep and full of secret things. There may have been a final catastrophic event too. Around 8,200 years ago, a massive underwater landslide occurred off the coast of Norway. It is called the Storegga Slide, and it was enormous. One of the largest known submarine landslides in geological history. It sent a tsunami across the North Sea that was several metres high. Whatever remained of Doggerland's coastal lowlands at that point would have been swept clean. Some of the last people of Doggerland may have experienced that wave. Imagine standing on a low, flat coastline, the kind of place where the land barely rises above the sea. It is early morning, perhaps. The water is calm. And then, somewhere on the horizon, you see the sea pulling back, further than it has ever pulled back before. The sand stretching out, exposed. Fish flopping in shallow puddles. And then the distant sound, low at first, like the world itself inhaling. And then the wave. I do not dwell on that image too long. It is not the feeling we are going for tonight. What I want you to hold instead is the image of Doggerland as it was. Green. Alive. Full of people who did not know the word Doggerland, who called it simply home, who never imagined it could disappear. We do not know their names. We do not know their stories. But their harpoon points come up in fishing nets, and for a moment they are almost here again. If your eyes feel heavy now, let them close. It is okay to let this story wash over you like water, soft and dark, and full of slow, quiet things. You are doing so well just being here, just breathing. Let's move gently into the next part of our journey. Chapter 3. The Black Sea and the memory of a great flood. There is a body of water in the world that may have been, not so long ago, something very different from what it is today. The Black Sea sits between Europe and Asia, bordered now by countries like Turkey, Romania, Bulgaria, Ukraine and Russia. It is a large sea, not quite as salty as the ocean, because it receives a lot of fresh water from rivers, and it has only a narrow connection to the Mediterranean through what we now call the Bosphorus Strait. that thin ribbon of water that runs through modern Istanbul. About 12,000 years ago, after the last ice age, the Black Sea was not a sea at all. It was a lake, a very large freshwater lake, isolated from the Mediterranean, surrounded by land on all sides. People lived around its shores. Farmers, some of the earliest farmers in Europe and Western Asia, were just beginning to plant seeds in the rich soil at the lake's edges. Communities were growing. Small settlements were forming. Life was, by the standards of that time, relatively stable. And then, somewhere around 7,500 years ago, something changed at the Bosphorus. The exact nature of what happened is debated among scientists, but the most widely discussed theory, proposed by oceanographers William Ryan and Walter Pittman in the 1990s, suggests that the Mediterranean Sea, which had been rising with global sea levels as the Ice Age ended, eventually reached a height where it began to spill over the natural barrier at the Bosphorus. At first, perhaps a trickle, and then, as the water wore away the barrier, more and more water, eventually a torrent. Ryan and Pittman described it as a catastrophic flood. They estimated that at its peak, the water flowing from the Mediterranean into the Black Sea basin was 200 times the volume of Niagara Falls. The Black Sea lake, which sat at a lower elevation than the Mediterranean, rose rapidly, perhaps up to 15 centimetres a day. For the people living on its shores, the water was coming closer every morning they woke up. What had been their fields would have become shallow water. What had been their village would have become a fishing spot, and then even that would disappear. They would have had to run. Where did they go? Some scientists believe these displaced people, fleeing the rising Black Sea, carried their farming knowledge and their stories with them into Europe, into the Middle East, into Central Asia. They brought seeds and livestock and the memory of what had happened to their land, and the story of the Great Flood followed them wherever they went. Beneath the Black Sea today, there is evidence of this drowned landscape. In the early 2000s, oceanographer Robert Ballard, the same man who found the wreck of the Titanic, led expeditions to explore the Black Sea's floor. At around 100 metres depth, his team found evidence of an ancient shoreline, a clear change in the seafloor that marked where land had once met water. And near that ancient shoreline, they found something remarkable. Structures, rectangular shapes in the mud, the outlines of buildings. They were not pyramids or grand temples. They were simple, the kind of structures that ordinary people build when they need a place to live. But they were there, far beneath the Black Sea in the darkness and the cold, and they had been there for thousands of years. Ballard's team also found wooden beams, preserved in the deep water where there is very little oxygen and very little life to break things down. Wood that had been cut and shaped by human hands. Wood that had once been part of someone's home. The discovery made headlines around the world for a few days, as discoveries like this tend to do, and then the world moved on, as the world tends to do. But beneath the Black Sea, those structures are still there. Silent. Waiting. Breathing no air but surrounded by the deep, dark memory of what they once were. It is a difficult thing to hold in your mind, the idea that someone's home still exists in a way, just in a different form than it was intended. The walls are still walls, the beams are still beams. The shape of the place is still the shape of the place, just covered by 100 meters of water and 7,000 years of silence. For a moment, just breathe. Let your body be heavy. Let your thoughts drift wherever they want to drift. If you are thinking about your own home right now, your own walls and your own roof, that is okay. There is something warm in that thought. Your home is here, your bed is here, The water is very far away and very long ago. You are safe. Let us keep going just a little further. Chapter 4. Dwarka, the golden city beneath the sea. In the western part of India, where the state of Gujarat meets the Arabian Sea, there is a city called Dwarka. It is a real city, alive today, full of traffic and temples and the smell of incense and ocean air. It is considered one of the holiest cities in Hinduism, one of the 7 sacred cities that every devout Hindu hopes to visit in their lifetime. According to Hindu scripture, particularly the great epic called the Mahabharata, Dwarka was the kingdom of Lord Krishna. It was described as a city of extraordinary beauty, built on a special island, with wide streets, grand buildings, and a harbour full of ships. It was called the Golden City. It was a place of prosperity and divinity, and at some point, the stories say, it was swallowed by the sea. For a long time, scholars treated this as mythology. A beautiful story, certainly. A meaningful religious story. But a story nonetheless. And then, in the 1980s, a team of marine archaeologists from India began to investigate the waters off the coast of modern Dwarka. What they found was extraordinary. About half a kilometre from the shore, at a depth of 5 to 12 metres, they discovered the remains of what appeared to be a very old, very large settlement. Stone structures, stone anchors, pottery, evidence of city walls, a grid pattern suggesting planned streets. The scale of it was significant. This was not a small outpost or a single building. This was the remains of something that might have once been a major city. The archaeology was not simple. Underwater archaeology never is. The silt and the shifting currents had covered and uncovered things over centuries. Dating was difficult. Not everyone agreed on what exactly had been found or how old it was, but the evidence suggested the site could be very old. Some artefacts were dated to around 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, the time of the Late Bronze Age. Others possibly older. And the location, right at the edge of where land once was and sea now is, suggested that this was indeed a place that had been on dry land and had gradually slipped beneath thee. Waves as sea levels changed over millennia. Was it really Krishna's Dwarka? Was it really the golden city of the epics? That, honestly, no one can say for certain. The connection between real archaeological sites and the cities of ancient stories is always complicated. Stories grow and change. A real place can become the seed of a much larger legend. A legend can preserve a memory of a real place in a form that is impossible to verify fully. But here is what we can say with reasonable confidence. There was something in those waters. Something large. Something old. Something that suggests human beings built and lived and flourished there, in a place that is now beneath the sea. And the people of that coast kept a memory of it, kept it alive in their stories and their prayers, for thousands of years. That in itself is a kind of miracle. The idea that a community can lose a place, can watch the sea take it, and can still carry the memory of it forward, still name a city after it, still consider it sacred, still tell their children about it as if it were just beyond the horizon, beneath the water that they could see from their windows every morning. Memory is its own kind of archaeology. We dig through our stories the way scientists dig through sediment, looking for the hard, real thing underneath the soft layers of time. As we drift toward the end of this first part of our journey, I want you to just rest for a moment with everything we have touched. We began with the shape of the world 20,000 years ago, when the sea was low and the land was wide, and people walked over ground that is now covered by ocean. We walked through Doggerland, the lost country beneath the North Sea, and held the ghost of a harpoon point pulled up by accident in a fishing net. We stood at the edge of the Black Sea and imagined the water coming, slowly, every morning, a little higher, a little closer, and we drifted through the warm waters of the Arabian Sea to find the ghost of a golden city that might have been real after all. This is the world. This is how old and deep it is. We think of history as something that is written down in books, something that can be held and read and confirmed. But most of history is not written down. Most of history is under the water, or under the earth, or dissolved into the air of centuries. Most of what has ever happened is gone, in the way that waves are gone after they reach the shore. You can see them coming, and you can hear them breaking, but you cannot hold them. We are small, you and I. We are new. We have been here for the blink of an eye, compared to how long the sea has been rising and falling, how long the ice has been growing and melting, how long the earth has been, turning in its slow and patient arc around the sun. And that is not a sad thing. Not really. There is something so restful in that smallness, something that makes the weight of ordinary life feel lighter. The meetings you need to attend, the messages you need to answer, the small worries that feel so large at midnight, they are all so recent, so brief. The world held its breath for 200,000 years of human history, and then breathed out, and here you are, in this moment in your bed in the dark, listening to a story. About the sea, let your body be heavy now. Let your breath be slow. The water is far away. The history is far away. The stories we have touched tonight will still be there when you wake up. The sea will still be there. Doggerland will still be there, sleeping under the grey water of the North Sea, patient and quiet and full of beautiful things that no one can see. Chapter 5. The stones beneath the Japanese Sea. There is a place in the ocean near Japan that makes people argue. Scientists argue about it. Historians argue about it. Divers who have seen it with their own eyes come back to the surface and still cannot agree on what they saw. And that, in a quiet way, makes it one of the most interesting places in the world. It is called Yonaguni Monument. Yonaguni is a small island, the westernmost island of Japan, sitting closer to Taiwan than it does to the main Japanese islands. It is a quiet place, green hills, warm water, the kind of island that feels very far from everything. In 1986, a diver named Kihachiro Aratake was exploring the waters just off Yonaguni's southern coast. He was looking for hammerhead sharks, which are known to gather in those waters. But what he found instead was something that stopped him completely. Beneath the surface, at a depth of about 5 to 30 meters, there was a structure. It was enormous. A massive formation of flat, angular rock, rising from the seafloor like the ruins of something that was once very much above the water. There were wide, flat terraces, almost like steps. There were right angles. There were what appeared to be walls, pillars, and a kind of road or path running along the edge. There was a feature that looked almost like a grand staircase, cut from the living rock, leading from the lower depths up toward the surface. Aratake brought other divers. Then researchers came. Then cameras. Then the debate began. Some scientists, including a Japanese geologist named Masaki Kimura, who spent years studying the site, argued that the formations were too regular, too precisely angled to be natural. Kimura believed Yonaguni was the remains of a human-built structure, perhaps a ceremonial platform or a large public building, from a civilization that lived in the area at least, 5,000 years ago, possibly much older, when sea levels were low enough for this site to have been above water. He pointed to specific features. Channels carved in straight lines, what appeared to be carved faces or figures in the rock, a large arch-like formation, symmetrical features that, he argued, nature alone would be unlikely to produce. Other scientists disagreed. They said the rock at Yonaguni is a fine-grained mudstone and sandstone that naturally fractures in straight lines and right angles. The sea, over thousands of years, erodes rock in very regular patterns. What looks like a staircase might just be the natural layering of the rock, exposed by wave action and current. What looks like a carved face might be a natural concavity in the stone, given meaning by human minds that are always searching for patterns, always looking for faces in the shapes of things. The debate has not been resolved. And maybe it does not need to be resolved tonight. Maybe the most interesting thing about Yonaguni is not which side is right, but the fact that the question exists at all. The fact that there is something down there, real and stone and enormous, that makes thoughtful people disagree about the deepest nature of human history. Because here is what both sides agree on. Whether the structure is natural or human-made, it was once above the water. The sea level around Yonaguni was low enough, at the end of the last ice age, that this rock formation would have been completely dry land. And if people were living in that region at that time, and we know they were, then they would have walked on it. They would have seen it. A natural formation of this size and regularity would have been deeply meaningful to people who saw the world as full of spirit and significance. Perhaps they built around it. Perhaps they carved into it, using what nature had provided as the foundation for something more. Perhaps they held ceremonies on its wide, flat terraces, looking out over a sea that was much further away than it is now. And then the water came. Slowly, the way it always comes. And the terraces went under, and the staircase went under, and whatever meaning that place held was carried away by people who were forced to move, who carried their memories and their stories with them into a world that was always, slowly, changing. Picture the water rising over those flat stones. Picture the last day that someone stood on the highest terrace and looked out at the sea and knew that the sea was coming. Not today, not this month, maybe not even this year, but coming. And then drifting away from that image, letting it go soft, letting the water cover it, letting it rest. For a moment, just breathe. Notice your body. Notice where you are. Notice that the only water near you tonight is quiet, is controlled, is the water in a glass on your nightstand, or the water running in a pipe somewhere in the walls of thee. Building around you, ordinary water doing ordinary things. You are safe. You are still. The world is turning very slowly outside. Let us move gently forward. Chapter 6. Alexandria, the Library and the Sea. There is a city in Egypt that has been standing at the edge of the sea for more than 2,000 years. It is called Alexandria, and it is still there today, a busy, lively city on the coast of the Mediterranean. But the Alexandria that exists today is not the same Alexandria that existed in the ancient world. The ancient Alexandria was one of the greatest cities in the history of the world, and a large part of it is now underwater. Alexandria was founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE. That is more than 2,300 years ago. Alexander chose the site carefully, a stretch of Mediterranean coastline in northern Egypt, connected to a large natural harbour with an island just offshore that would eventually be connected to the mainland by a long causeway. The city was planned from the beginning to be magnificent. Wide streets laid out in a grid, enormous public buildings, gardens, temples, a palace district that stretched along the harbour, and the library. The Library of Alexandria is one of the most famous things that has ever existed, partly because it existed so magnificently, and partly because it is so completely gone. It was, in its time, an attempt to collect all the knowledge in the world in one place. Scholars came from across the Mediterranean world to study there. The library is said to have held hundreds of thousands of scrolls, the writings of scientists, philosophers, doctors, mathematicians, historians, poets, the sum of everything the ancient world knew, or at least as much of it as could be gathered. It burned, or it decayed, or it was destroyed in stages over centuries. No one is entirely sure. The full story of the library's end is one of history's great mysteries, and we will not solve it tonight. But the library is gone, and what it contained is gone, and some fraction of all human knowledge was lost with it. That is a melancholy thought. Let it rest lightly. You do not need to carry it. What concerns us tonight is what happened to the city itself. Alexandria was built partly on reclaimed land, on areas that were marshy or shallow at the sea's edge, on islands connected to the mainland by human engineering. Over centuries, the city grew and expanded and became one of the dominant cities of the ancient world. At its peak, it may have had a population of over 1 million people. That made it, 2,000 years ago, one of the largest cities in the world. And then, slowly, it began to sink. The land beneath Alexandria is not entirely stable. The Nile Delta, on which much of the Egyptian coast sits, is composed of sediments deposited by the river over millions of years. Sediment compacts over time, and when the weight of a large city is placed upon it, it compacts even faster. Couple this with the gradual rise of sea levels over the last 2,000 years, and the result is that large portions of ancient Alexandria are now beneath the sea. The royal quarter, where the Ptolemaic rulers of Egypt lived, the Grand Palace district with its temples and statues and ceremonial spaces, is now beneath the eastern harbour of modern Alexandria. It has been lying there for roughly 1,500 years. In the 1990s, a French underwater archaeologist named Franck Goddio led a series of expeditions into that harbour. What he and his team found was remarkable. They mapped the ruins of the ancient royal quarter lying between 3 and 8 metres below the surface. They found columns and statues, sphinxes and building foundations, all resting on the seafloor just beneath the harbour where modern ships pass over them every day. They found a sphinx that is believed to have been associated with Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy Sith. They found large blocks of granite carved with the names of ancient rulers. They found statues that had been standing in the royal courts when Julius Caesar visited the city more than 2,000 years ago, all of it sleeping in a few metres of Mediterranean water, within sight of modern apartment buildings and beach resorts, and the restaurants where people eat grilled fish on. Summer evenings. There is something almost impossible to believe about that proximity. The distance between the living city and the drowned one is so small. You could swim it. You could hold your breath and look down through a few metres of water and see the same stones that Cleopatra walked on, the same harbour that her ships sailed through, the same columns that stood in the palace where she received visitors, argued with enemies, fell in love with powerful men. It is all still there, quiet and dark and patient. Goddio's team also found evidence of the famous lighthouse of Alexandria, the Pharos, which was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The lighthouse stood on the island of Pharos at the harbour entrance and is believed to have been over 100 metres tall. It guided ships into the harbour for centuries. It was damaged and eventually destroyed by earthquakes in the 14th century CE. The ruins, great blocks of carved stone tumbled into the harbour, are still there in the shallows, mixed with the remains of later structures, a compressed archive of centuries of stone. Some of those stones have been brought up and studied. They include colossal statues, obelisks, columns of red Aswan granite, objects that once stood in the open air, visible to everyone in one of the world's greatest cities, now resting in shallow water, covered in algae and thyme. There is an emotion that does not have a simple name in English, that feeling of looking at something grand that has fallen, something great that has become quiet. It is not exactly sadness, it is more like awe mixed with gentleness. The feeling of being in the presence of something very old that has survived in a way it never expected to survive. The Portuguese language has a word saudade that comes close. It means a deep, soft longing for something that is gone, or something that may never have been fully real. The feeling of reaching toward something beautiful and not quite touching it. Standing over the harbour of Alexandria, or simply imagining it from the warmth of your bed tonight, you might feel something like that, a soft reaching toward a world that was brilliant and human and full of complicated life, now resting on the seafloor, still and safe in its own way, beyond harm at last. Let your breathing slow, just a little more now. Let the image of Alexandria go soft, the columns in the harbour, the Sphinx lying on its side in the dark water, the city above going about its busy, warm, ordinary life, completely unaware of the wonder resting just below its feet. We are all living above something, if we only knew. If your body feels heavy now, let it be heavy. That is the weight of rest. That is the body asking for what it needs. You do not need to fight it. Let's drift just a little further together. Chapter 7. Hellike, the city that vanished in one night. Most of the cities we have talked about tonight were swallowed slowly. Over centuries, over millennia, the water came and they went under. But there is one ancient Greek city whose end was neither slow nor gradual. Its name was Hellike, and it disappeared in a single night. Hellike was a prosperous city on the southern shore of the Gulf of Corinth, in the Peloponnese region of Greece. In its time, the 5th and 4th centuries BCA, it was an important city. It was the leader of a league of cities in the region. It had a famous sanctuary dedicated to the god Poseidon, the god of the sea and of earthquakes, which the ancient Greeks knew had something to do with each other. People came from across the Greek world to worship at Hellike's temple of Poseidon. It was a place of pilgrimage, a place of importance, a place full of life. In the winter of 373 BCE, something happened. Ancient sources, including the historians Diodorus Siculus and Strabo, record that in a single night, Hellike was struck by a catastrophic earthquake followed immediately by a tsunami, a giant wave from the Gulf of Corinth. The city was entirely destroyed. The ground beneath it, already weakened by the earthquake, liquefied, a process that happens when saturated soil shakes so hard that it briefly behaves like a liquid, and the entire city sank into the gulf. By morning, Hellike was gone. Ancient writers described the aftermath with a quiet kind of horror that still carries weight today. They said that nothing remained above the water. Not a rooftop, not a column, not a wall. The gulf had taken everything. The bodies of the people of Hellike were never recovered. 2,000 people, according to some accounts, lost their lives. Possibly more. For centuries, ancient sailors and travellers reported that on calm days, when the water of the Gulf was still and clear, you could look down from a boat and see the ruins of, hell-like below the surface, the broken walls, the submerged streets. A bronze statue of Poseidon, the god to whom the city had been devoted, standing upright on the seafloor, its outstretched hand visible just below the surface, as if reaching up, toward the world that had forgotten it. Imagine being on a small boat, the water glassy, and still in the early morning. Looking down and seeing walls, streets, the shape of a life below you. The statue of Poseidon, if it ever existed, has never been found. Centuries of sediment have covered what was once the seafloor of the Gulf. The coastline itself has changed since ancient times. Finding Helike proved difficult for many years, and some historians began to wonder if the ancient accounts had been exaggerated, if perhaps Helike had been destroyed but not quite so completely, not quite so dramatically. And then, in 2001, a team of Greek and American archaeologists found it. Not in the Gulf itself, as the ancient writers described, but near the modern city of Aijon, buried under several meters of sediment. The ancient coastline had changed significantly over 2,000 years of geological activity. What had once been the seafloor near the city was now covered by river deposits and new land. The city was not, as some had described, lying under the visible water of the Gulf. It was buried in the earth near the coast, sealed in layers of mud and sediment that had accumulated over the centuries. What the archaeologists found was a classical era town, streets, buildings, pottery, artefacts. The kind of sight that speaks quietly of ordinary life. People eating and sleeping and arguing and celebrating, and then, in one terrible night, losing everything. The discovery was one of the most significant finds in Greek archaeology in recent decades. It confirmed that Helike was real, that the ancient sources were not pure fantasy, that something catastrophic did indeed happen here in the winter of 373 BC. The bronze statue of Poseidon has still not been found. But maybe it is still there, somewhere, under the earth, or under the water, or in the sediment where the Gulf meets the land. Waiting with the patience that only stone and bronze can have, that absolute, unhurried quality of things that do not need to be anywhere in particular. Poseidon, god of the sea and earthquakes. The people of Helike had worshipped him, built him a magnificent sanctuary, believed that his favour protected them. And then the earth shook, and the water came, and the sanctuary went under with everything else. The ancient world was full of this kind of irony. It was full of the human experience of believing in protection and finding none, of building something beautiful and watching it fall. It was also full of the human experience of continuing, of building again, of telling the story, of coming back centuries later in a boat and looking down through clear water at what had been, and not turning away from it. You do not need to turn away from anything tonight. The stories of these lost places are not frightening. They are very, very old. The grief in them, the human grief of the people who lost their cities and their homes, has long since dissolved into the world. It has become part of the sediment, part of the slow, patient earth. For a moment, just breathe. You have been travelling a long way tonight, through time and water, and the quiet spaces between history and myth. You have done beautifully, just lying there, just listening, just being. If your thoughts are drifting, let them drift. If the story is becoming a blur of calm images, stone walls and dark water and distant lights, that is exactly right. That is the story doing what it is meant to do. You are allowed to rest. Chapter 8. The Sacred Cenotes of the Maya. We have been talking mostly about cities swallowed by the sea. But water does not only come from the ocean, sometimes it comes from beneath the earth, and sometimes it does not swallow cities, but becomes a city's most sacred centre. In the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, the ancient Maya built one of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history. Their cities rose from the jungle, great pyramids and ball courts and observatory towers reaching toward the sky. They developed a complex writing system, one of the few true writing systems ever developed independently in the ancient world. They had a profound and precise understanding of astronomy. Their calendar was in some ways more accurate than the European calendar being used at the same time, on the other side of the world. But the Yucatan Peninsula has almost no rivers. It is a flat, porous limestone plateau, and when it rains, the water sinks straight through the rock and collects in underground rivers and caves. The surface of the land is dry, except where the roof of an underground cave collapses. When limestone caves become large enough, their ceilings sometimes give way, and a hole opens to the surface. The underground water is exposed. Sunlight reaches down into it for the first time in the cave's history. These openings are called cenotes, from the Maya word zonot, meaning sacred well or abyss. And they are extraordinary. Imagine a perfectly round pool of water, set into the earth like a jewel. The walls are white and tan limestone, draped in ferns and flowering vines. Tree roots come over the edge and trail down into the water, reaching for the depth. The water itself is extraordinary. It is not the green-brown of most fresh water. It is turquoise and clear, impossibly clear, clear enough to see the bottom 30 or 40 metres below, clear enough to see the white sand and the submerged stalactites that once hung from the ceiling of the cave before it collapsed. The Maya considered cenotes to be sacred beyond ordinary measure. They were openings into the underworld, passages between the human realm and the realm of the gods and the dead. The Maya believed in a complex underworld called Xibalba, a place of trials and spirits that lay beneath the surface of the earth. The cenotes were doorways, and because they were doorways, they were also places of offering. Archaeologists have spent decades, carefully, slowly, diving into these sacred wells and retrieving what was thrown into them over centuries of Maya ritual. The objects they have found read like a catalogue of everything that was most precious and most meaningful to the people who offered them. Gold, jade, elaborate pottery, carved obsidian, rubber balls from the sacred ball game, human bones, evidence that in some cases the offerings included human beings, perhaps willing participants in sacred ritual, perhaps not. Carved wooden objects that should not have survived but did, preserved in the cold, dark, low-oxygen water at the bottom of the cenote. One of the most studied cenotes is at the ancient city of Chichen Itza in the northern Yucatan. It is called the Sacred Cenote, or the Well of Sacrifice. It is large, about 60 metres across and 20 metres deep to the water surface, with the water itself going another 20 metres or so below that. For centuries, from roughly the 7th century say into the period of Spanish colonization in the 16th century, this cenote received offerings. Early Spanish accounts describe ceremonies at the cenote, At dawn, objects and sometimes people were thrown into the water as offerings to the rain god Chahak. Spanish priests, horrified by what they interpreted as brutality, wrote about it in detail, though their accounts are coloured by their own cultural perspective and their desire. To justify the conquest. In the early 20th century, Edward Herbert Thompson, the American consul to Yucatan, and an enthusiastic if not entirely scrupulous amateur archaeologist, dredged the sacred, cenote, and brought up enormous quantities of material: gold discs, jade ornaments, copper bells, human bones. Much of this material ended up in the Peabody Museum at Harvard, where it remained for decades before some of it was returned to Mexico. Later, more careful underwater excavations have continued to reveal the cenote's secrets. Each object that comes out of the dark water is a message sent by someone who believed deeply, who stood at the edge of this extraordinary hole in the earth and threw something precious into it, into the darkness, toward the gods they believed lived there. What is more human than that? Standing at the edge of something vast and dark and throwing something precious into it, hoping to be heard. We do it too, in our own ways. We light candles. We say prayers. We make promises in the dark. We throw coins into fountains, which is itself a memory, perhaps, of offerings to water, of the very old human instinct to give something to the deep places of the world. The cenotes of the Yucatan are still there. Some of them are tourist destinations now, places where visitors can swim in that unreal turquoise water, surrounded by limestone walls and trailing roots, looking down into depths that were once considered sacred beyond ordinary approach. There is something slightly strange about that, maybe, but also something ongoing. The water is still beautiful. The depth is still there. The sense that something significant lives in the cool, clear, patient dark is still there too, if you are quiet enough to feel it. And in the deepest cenotes, in the ones that have not been fully explored, there are still things waiting. More offerings. More messages sent downward through water and time. More evidence of people who believed and hoped and mourned and celebrated and threw their most precious things into the dark, because it was the only way they knew to reach thee. World beneath this one. Let those images settle gently around you now. The turquoise water. The white limestone walls. The tree roots trailing down into a depth that holds centuries of quiet devotion. If you are still awake, that is fine. There is more to come. And if you are drifting, that is fine too. More than fine. That is exactly where this story wants to take you. Let your breathing be slow and even. Let the weight of your body press into the place where you are resting. The world outside is doing what it always does, turning slowly, breathing in and out with tides and winds and the long soft rhythms of seasons. You are part of that turning. You always have been. Sleep reset. Take a breath. A slow breath in and a slow breath out. You have been listening for a while now. Your body is doing what it does best, resting, repairing, drifting towards sleep. You do not need to fight that drift. You do not need to stay alert. If you miss a part of the story, it will still be here. The lost cities are patient. They have been waiting for thousands of years. They can wait a little longer while you sleep. If your eyes are closed, keep them closed. If your thoughts are blurring at the edges, let them blur. The words will come to you like water, soft and surrounding, whether you are awake or asleep. Just rest. We have more to discover together in the chapters still to come. The Mediterranean holds more secrets than we have touched tonight. There are sunken harbours along the coast of Italy. There are ancient ports in Greece and Turkey, where the water came in not with a crash, but with the slow, almost polite certainty of geological time. There are places along the coast of India and Sri Lanka, where fishermen claim to see, on very calm days, the shapes of buildings far below the surface. There are stories from the Pacific Islands about islands that were once connected by land, now separated by water, and the oral traditions that remember when people could walk. Between them, the ocean floor is not empty. It never was. It is a museum, an archive, a library that no fire can reach, covered in water and time and the slow, patient work of becoming something other than what it was. And we are on our way through it, quietly, together. Let the warmth of your bed be the warmth of something very safe. You are exactly where you are supposed to be. Nothing is required of you right now, except the very easy work of breathing and letting go. The tide is moving somewhere out in the dark world. It does not need your help. The stars are doing what stars do. The earth is turning in its long, unhurried arc. And you are resting. That is everything. Chapter 9. The Drowned Harbours of the Roman World. There is a stretch of coastline in southern Italy, in the region around Naples, that has been sinking and rising for thousands of years. Not because of the sea exactly, but because of what is beneath the ground itself. The whole area sits on top of a vast volcanic system. Underground, the earth is restless. There are chambers of hot rock and gas shifting slowly beneath the surface, and as they move, the land above them moves too. Sometimes the land rises, sometimes it falls. Geologists have a name for this process. They call it bradycism, from Greek words meaning slow earthquake. It is not a single violent event. It is the earth breathing, very slowly, over decades and centuries. The ancient Romans knew this coastline well. They loved it. The Bay of Naples was one of the most fashionable places in the Roman world. Wealthy Romans built their villas here. Emperors kept residences here. The water was warm and blue, the food was good, the scenery was extraordinary, and the volcanic soil grew some of the best grapes in the empire. The town of Pozzuoli, just west of Naples, was one of the busiest ports in the ancient Mediterranean. Before the port of Ostia near Rome was fully developed, Pozzuoli was the main harbour through which goods flowed into Italy from across the empire. Grain from Egypt. Marble from Greece. Spices from the east. Wine and oil from Spain and North Africa. The harbour was a living thing, loud and commercial and full of ships and sailors and merchants speaking dozens of languages. Parts of that harbour are now under the sea, not because the ocean rose exactly, but because the ground beneath Pozzuoli fell. The bradycism that governs this coastline pulled the land downward over centuries, and the harbour structures went with it. Columns that once stood above the water now stand below it. Docks that once received the great cargo ships of the Roman Empire are now covered in seagrass and barnacles, visited by fish instead of sailors. There is a place in Pozzuoli called the Macellum, which was a Roman market building. It has 3 tall columns still standing, and these columns tell a remarkable story. The bottom section of each column, near the base, is heavily pitted and bored by a type of marine mollusk called a date mussel, a creature that burrows into stone but only when. The stone is underwater, This means the lower portions of the columns were underwater for an extended period, perhaps several centuries during the medieval era, when the ground had subsided enough to let the sea in. Then the ground rose again, the columns lifted back above the water, and the pitting remained as a record, written in stone, of the time the sea had visited. It is one of the most literal pieces of geological evidence in the world. The columns themselves are the record. The little holes bored by small creatures who simply did what small creatures do, eating into stone underwater, became, thousands of years later, proof of an entire chapter of geological history. There is something wonderful about that. The smallest, most ordinary acts becoming evidence. The tiny mollusks boring their tiny holes had no idea they were writing history. They were just living. And their living left a mark that outlasted them by millennia. We are all leaving marks, in ways we cannot always see or understand. Picture those columns now, if you like. Standing in the evening light, their tan stone warm in the sun, the sea glittering just beyond them. The market is gone. The merchants are gone. The ships are gone. But the columns remain, standing in the remains of the harbour, their lower halves still pitted with the evidence of long submersion, reaching up into the Italian sky as calmly as if nothing unusual had ever happened to them at all. Let that image be soft and still. The world turns, the land rises and falls, the sea comes and goes, the columns stand. For a moment, just breathe. In slowly, and out slowly. Your body knows how to do this. It has been breathing since the first moment you arrived in the world, and it knows exactly what to do. You do not have to manage it or think about it. Just let it happen. Let's keep moving gently. Chapter 10. Port Royal, the city that sin built and the sea took. Not all the cities we are visiting tonight are ancient. Not all of them were lost to geological time or the slow drift of centuries. Some were lost much more recently. And some of them, in the stories that grew up around them, were said to have deserved their fate. Port Royal, Jamaica. The year is 1692. Port Royal sits at the end of a long, thin spit of sand that juts into the Kingston harbour on the southern coast of Jamaica. In the late 17th century, it was one of the most important cities in the entire Caribbean. It was a centre of trade, of politics, of the sugar economy that was enriching England and destroying enslaved African lives across the islands. It was a busy, crowded, wealthy, and spectacularly morally complicated place. It was also known, in its time and in the centuries since, as one of the most dissolute cities in the world. The English writers of the period called it the wickedest city on earth, and they did not mean it entirely as a criticism. Port Royal was a city of merchants and privateers, of taverns and gaming houses, of people who had come from across the Atlantic world to make money by whatever means were available and to spend that money loudly. The privateer captains who operated out of Port Royal, men licensed by the English crown to attack Spanish ships, brought enormous wealth into the harbour. Henry Morgan, the most famous of them, used Port Royal as his base and eventually became the island's lieutenant governor. It was a city built on sand, literally and metaphorically. The spit of land on which it sat was composed of loose water-saturated sediment, the kind of material that seems solid until the earth shakes. On the morning of June 7th, 1692, the earth shook. It was a massive earthquake, estimated today at around magnitude 7.5. It struck at about 11:43 in the morning, a time when the city was very much awake and active. The shaking was violent and sustained, and the saturated sand beneath Port Royal did what saturated sand does when it shakes. It liquefied. The ground stopped behaving like ground and started behaving like water. Buildings tilted and sank. Streets dropped below sea level. People ran and found nowhere to run to. 2/3 of Port Royal slid into the harbour. In roughly 2 minutes, the sea swallowed a large portion of one of the wealthiest cities in the Caribbean. Contemporary accounts describe the horror and the speed of it, the way buildings simply fell sideways into the water, the way the harbour suddenly had streets and rooftops visible. Just beneath its surface, the way survivors clung to wreckage and watched what had been their city become the seafloor. Between 1,000 and 3,000 people died in the earthquake and its immediate aftermath. A subsequent tsunami, generated by the same earthquake, caused further destruction around the harbour. Disease in the weeks that followed killed thousands more. The city was rebuilt partially on the land that remained, but it never recovered its former prominence. The earthquake had ended Port Royal's era as one of the Caribbean's great cities. Over time, Kingston across the harbour became the dominant city of Jamaica. Port Royal became a small town, a naval base, a place of memory, and beneath the harbour, in about 10 to 15 metres of water, the sunken portion of the city remained. Excavations at the underwater site of Port Royal began in earnest in the 1960s and have continued intermittently since. Because the earthquake happened in 1692, which is recent by archaeological standards, and because the liquefaction was rapid, the site is remarkably intact. The buildings did not fall apart and scatter. They sank relatively quickly, preserving their contents in place. Archaeologists have found taverns with their bottles still on the shelves. They have found a watch, a pocket watch from the 17th century, its hands stopped at 11:43, the exact moment the earthquake struck. They have found pewter plates, shoes, intact wine bottles, cannons, coins, the entire material culture of a 17th century Caribbean port city, preserved in the harbour mud. That stopped watch is one of the most quietly powerful objects in all of underwater archaeology. The hands at 11:43. The moment frozen. The city going about its Tuesday morning business. The merchants and the tavern keepers and the sailors and the children and the enslaved people who had no choice about any of it. All of them stopped at that exact tick of that exact clock by something entirely indifferent to their plans. Time does not care about our plans. That is not a cruel thought, really. It is just true. And there is a strange peace in the truth of it. We make our plans, and we go about our days, and the world turns beneath us in ways we cannot control or predict, and all we can do in the end is be here, be present, breathe. The people of Port Royal were breathing at 11:42. And then the world changed. We cannot know what they wanted for that afternoon, for that evening. We cannot know what small ordinary things they were looking forward to. A meal, maybe. A letter from home. The sight of a particular ship coming into harbour. What I know is that they were fully alive at 11:42. And that is worth holding, gently for a moment. The fullness of being alive, of having plans and hungers and ordinary desires. You are fully alive right now. Your chest is rising and falling. Your blood is moving through all the complicated and wonderful geography of your body. Your mind is somewhere between waking and sleeping, in that gentle borderland where the most interesting things happen. Let that be enough for this moment. Let it be everything. Chapter 11. The Sunken City of Pavlopetri. Greece has given the world a great many things. philosophy, democracy, the theatre, the Olympic Games, the foundation of so much of what the Western world thinks of as civilization, and, beneath its waters, one of the oldest submerged cities ever found. Off the southern coast of the Peloponnese, near a small modern village, there is a site called Pavlopetri. It lies in very shallow water, 3 to 4 meters deep, just off a sandy beach. The water is clear. On a calm day, if you look from the shore or wade in up to your waist, you can see it. The stones of the streets, the outlines of the buildings, the shapes of a city frozen in shallow turquoise water, completely visible, almost close enough to touch. Pavlopetri was discovered in 1967 by a British oceanographer named Nicholas Fleming, who was swimming in the area and noticed the regular rectangular shapes beneath him. He returned with a team and began to map the site. What they found was a substantial settlement. Streets, buildings, courtyards, even what appeared to be tombs, covering an area of about 30,000 square meters on the seafloor. And it was old, very old. Pottery and other artefacts found at the site indicate that Pavlopetri was occupied from at least the early Bronze Age, roughly 5,000 years ago. Some evidence suggests occupation even earlier, perhaps as far back as the Neolithic period. The city was continuously inhabited for thousands of years, through different eras of Greek prehistory, through what archaeologists call the early, middle and late Bronze Age, before it was finally submerged, probably in a series of earthquakes, sometime around 1000 BC or so, roughly 3,000 years ago. What makes Pavlopetri extraordinary, apart from its age, is its completeness. The streets are still there. The building plans are still there. You can walk, in your imagination, through a city that was functioning around the time of the Trojan War, the time that Homer wrote about, the time when Mycenaean Greece was at. Its height. The street layouts, the room divisions, the spatial organization of the city, it is all legible. More recent surveys using advanced sonar technology have revealed even more detail. Buildings that had not been noticed before, a complex structure that might have been a communal hall or a storage facility. Evidence of the kind of urban organization that you would associate with a city that was planned and administered, not just organically grown. The people of Pavlopetri lived by the sea. Their economy was based on fishing and trade, on the movement of goods across the Aegean. Their harbour, or what served as their harbour, would have been right there. The water they can see from the windows of every building in the city, that same water that would eventually rise and cover everything. It is one of those places where the distance between the living world and the lost world is very small. Tourists visit the beach near Pavlopetri today. They spread their towels. They swim in the same water that covers an ancient city. The city is still there, just beneath their feet as they wade in, the stones smooth and dark in the shallow water. I find that thought very beautiful, the way the living and the lost share the same water, the way the present and the past are separated by only a few meters, a few thousand years, the length of one slow breath. You might be sharing your home with history in ways you cannot see. The ground beneath your street, the layers of settlement and habitation that go down and down under any place where people have lived for any length of time, the things that were dropped and buried and covered by the ordinary accumulation of centuries. We are always living on top of something older, and that older thing is not threatening or sad. It is just the depth of the world, the way the world keeps everything, in one form or another, for a very long time. Sleep reset. Take a breath. A slow one, all the way in and all the way out. If you have been drifting, that is wonderful. If you have heard only half of what has been said tonight, and let the other half blend into dreams, that is exactly right. This story was made for the space between waking and sleeping. It lives most comfortably in that soft, hazy border where words become images and images become feelings and feelings become the gentle dark. You are safe in that border. Nothing can reach you there. The stories will keep moving, soft and slow, and they will be here whenever you surface, if you surface, until morning. Just rest. Your breathing is all that matters now. Slow. Even. In and out like the tide, like the long swell of the ocean, like all those deep rhythms that have been moving through the world since before the first human being looked up at the stars and wondered. Chapter 12. Beneath the Mediterranean, a sea full of ghosts. If you could drain the Mediterranean Sea, just for a moment, just in your imagination, what you would find on its floor would be extraordinary beyond easy description. The Mediterranean is one of the oldest trade routes in human history. For thousands and thousands of years, the civilizations that grew up around its shores, Egyptian, Phoenician, Greek, Roman, Carthaginian, Byzantine, Arab, Italian, Spanish, they traded with each other across that water. Goods moved, ideas moved, people moved, and ships sank. A conservative estimate suggests that there are more than 300 sunken shipwrecks from antiquity lying on the floor of the Mediterranean, and that number increases dramatically with every new survey. More careful estimates suggest there may be thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, when you include the medieval and early modern periods as well. The Mediterranean seafloor is one of the densest repositories of archaeological material in the world. But it is not only ships. Entire coastal settlements lie beneath the Mediterranean. The sea level has risen since Roman times. Not dramatically, perhaps a metre or two in most places, but enough, combined with the subsidence of land and the effects of geological activity, to put many ancient harbours and waterfront structures permanently underwater. Along the coast of what is now Croatia, there are Roman fish ponds and harbour structures lying in a few metres of water. The ancient city of Epidaurus, different from the famous sanctuary of the same name, lies partly submerged off the Dalmatian coast. Along the coast of Turkey, ancient Lycian cities have sections underwater, their stone streets and building foundations visible from boats in clear weather. In the shallow waters off the coast of what was ancient Phoenicia, now Lebanon, there are harbour installations from the Bronze Age, stone anchors and breakwaters from the same period when the great Phoenician traders were sailing as far as England to trade for tin and Spain to trade for silver. And then there is the famous Antikythera shipwreck. In 1900, Greek sponge divers discovered a Roman-era shipwreck near the island of Antikythera between Crete and the Greek mainland. The ship had been carrying luxury goods, marble statues, glassware, jewellery, coins, all of it incredibly valuable by historical standards, and much of it was recovered. But the most remarkable thing in the wreck was not a statue or a piece of gold jewellery. It was a lump of corroded bronze, pulled up from the bottom and nearly discarded as meaningless. When it was carefully cleaned and studied, it turned out to be something that should not have existed, a mechanical device of extraordinary sophistication with dozens of interlocking bronze gears designed to model the movements of the sun and moon and predict astronomical events. It is called the Antikythera mechanism. It is estimated to be about 2,000 years old, and it is, by any measure, the most sophisticated mechanical device from the ancient world ever found. The level of engineering it represents was not matched in Europe until the mechanical clocks of the 14th century sea, more than 1,000 years later. It sat on the floor of the Mediterranean for 2,000 years. In the dark, in the cold, in the gradual dissolution of the ship around it, the bronze corroded, the gears fused, the outer casing dissolved, but the essential structure survived, and with it the evidence that someone 2,000 years ago understood the movements of the heavens well enough to build a machine to predict them. We do not know who made it. We do not know what workshop it came from, though there are strong arguments that it was made somewhere in the Greek world, possibly in Rhodes, possibly in Corinth. We do not know who owned it, or where the ship was taking it. We do not know if the person who made it understood what they had created, in the historical sense, whether they knew they were building something that would baffle and astound. People 2 millennia later, they were just doing their work, very skilled, very careful work, making something beautiful and precise and useful. And then the ship sank. The sea keeps so many things. This is one of the quiet miracles of the ocean floor. On land, things decay. Wood rots, metal rusts. Stone crumbles, organic material is eaten and dissolved and returned to the earth in a matter of years or decades. But on the seafloor, in the right conditions, the cold and the dark and the low oxygen and the sediment that slowly buries things, objects can survive for astonishing lengths of time. The wood of ancient ships, the leather of ancient sandals, the organic matter of food stored in ceramic jars, papyrus documents sealed in containers. All of these have been found in various states of preservation in underwater sites. The sea is an accidental archive. It did not set out to preserve these things. It was just being the sea, cold and dark and indifferent. But the result, for us, thousands of years later, is a record of human life that in many ways is richer and more intimate than what was preserved on land. The merchant who owned those olive oil jars, the sailor who wore those sandals, the Roman nobleman who was transporting those marble statues to his villa, and who drowned probably when the ship went down, and whose slaves drowned with him, and whose life ended in salt water and darkness in a way he certainly had not planned. All of them are present in the objects on the seafloor. Not as ghosts exactly, as evidence, as the residue of lives fully lived. We are all leaving residue. The objects in our homes, the things we use and wear and eat from, they will outlast us in most cases. They will end up somewhere, in a landfill perhaps, or recycled into something else, or if we are very unlucky and very interesting, on the floor of a future archaeological excavation. What would someone make of your bedroom if they found it 2,000 years from now? What would the objects in it tell them about who you were, and what you valued, and how you lived? It is a strange thing to think about. A gentle thing, the idea that the ordinary stuff of daily life is always also a message to the future, whether we intend it or not. Let that thought drift. Let it be soft and light, not heavy. You do not need to leave a message tonight. You do not need to mean anything more than you already mean. You are a person, in a bed, in the dark, breathing. And that is already remarkable. That has always been remarkable. Every single breathing person who has ever lived was remarkable, even the ones history forgot, even the ones the sea took, even the ones whose only memorial is a stopped watch-oar, a corroded gear or a small bone harpoon pulled up in a fishing net by accident. They were here. They breathed. They mattered. And so do you. If sleep is very close now, let it come. Open your hands metaphorically. Just let the grip of wakefulness loosen a little. It is safe dark. It is the kind of dark that has always held sleeping people, since the very first night a human being lay down and closed their eyes under the stars. You are part of that long line. You are one of the countless sleeping people who have come before and will come after. And tonight you are resting, while beneath the seas of the world the old cities rest too, patient and quiet and full of the long, slow dreaming of history. Let the waves come. Let them be soft. Let them be slow. You are already nearly there. Chapter 13. The Feeling of Deep Time. We have been travelling for a while now, you and I. We have drifted through Doggerland, that green and forgotten country beneath the North Sea. We have floated over the drowned royal quarters of Alexandria, past sphinxes sleeping in harbour mud. We have hovered above the shallow turquoise stones of Pavlopetri, and listened to the silence of Port Royal's stopped clock. We have touched the edge of the Black Sea's old shore, and felt the cool water of sacred Maya cenotes, and stood above the mysterious terraced stones of Yonaguni. It has been a long, quiet journey. And I want to slow it down even further now, not because the story is ending, not yet, but because this is the part where we stop accumulating new places and start feeling what all these places mean, what they say, together as a collection of quiet voices rising from the deep water. There is a phrase that scientists and philosophers use. Deep time. It was first used by the writer John McPhee, borrowing an idea from the geologist James Hutton, who in the 18th century looked at the rock formations of Scotland and understood, perhaps for the first time in Western scientific thought, that the earth was incomprehensibly old. Not thousands of years old as people then believed, not even millions, billions. Deep time is not the kind of time we feel in our daily lives. Our daily time is shallow. It has appointments in it, and deadlines, and the familiar rhythm of morning and evening. We feel it moving. We feel ourselves aging inside it. We remember last week, last year, the year we were born. That is our time. It is real, and it is ours. But deep time is something else. Deep time is the time in which mountains rise and are worn flat by rain, the time in which continents move across the surface of the earth like slow, enormous rafts, the time in which the same atoms that are in your body right now have been in sequence part of ancient seabeds, part of volcanic rock, part of the ocean, part of a tree, part of an animal, part of the air, and eventually part of you. Deep time makes ordinary time very small. Not meaninglessly small, just small in the way that a single note is small compared to a symphony. The note is real. The note matters. You can hear it and feel it and be moved by it. But it exists inside something enormous. Tonight, lying where you are lying, breathing the breath you are breathing, you are one note in a very long symphony. That is not a lonely thought. Or at least it does not need to be. There is company in deep time. Every creature that has ever breathed is there with you. Every person who lay down to sleep on a cold night 10,000 years ago, in a home that is now beneath the sea or beneath the earth, they are in the deep time too, not as individuals we can find and name, but as part of the enormous, ongoing fact of life on this planet. You belong to that. Completely and permanently. Let that settle into you like warmth. You belong to something very old and very large and very patient. And tonight, it is holding you while you rest. Chapter 14. Nan Madol, the city built on the sea. There is a place in the Pacific Ocean, on a small island called Pohnpei, in what is now the Federated States of Micronesia, where someone built a city on top of the sea. Not beside the sea, on it. Nan Madol is a series of artificial islands, nearly 100 of them, constructed from enormous basalt stones in a shallow coastal lagoon. The islands are connected by a network of canals, so that the whole complex is a kind of floating city, or rather a wading city, where the water moves between the platforms like streets between buildings. It has been called the Venice of the Pacific. The stones used to build Nan Madol are extraordinary. They are not cut and shaped. They are natural basalt columns, hexagonal in cross-section, the kind that form when volcanic lava cools very slowly and contracts into geometric prisms. On Pohnpei, these columns break free naturally and can be gathered from coastal areas. But the columns used at Nan Madol weigh between 5 and 50 tons each. Tens of thousands of them were transported and stacked to create the walls and platforms of the city. How they were moved is still not entirely understood. There are no roads on Pohnpei that could have carried objects of that weight. The most likely method involves moving the stones by raft across the water, using the lagoon and the coast as a highway. But even that would have required enormous organisation, enormous numbers of people, and an extraordinary commitment of collective effort. Nan Madol was built beginning perhaps around the first millennium C, though some researchers believe construction started even earlier. It reached its peak as the administrative centre of the Saudeleur dynasty, the rulers of Pohnpei, sometime between the 12th and 15th centuries. The central islet, called Nandauwas, was a mortuary complex, a place where the bodies of the ruling elite were prepared and buried. Its walls still stand, some of them 7 meters high, made of stacked basalt columns, in a pattern that looks almost like enormous rough timber, log cabin style, but in stone. Today, Nan Madol is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is also sinking. The artificial islands, built on coral and sediment in a shallow lagoon, are subsiding. The sea level around Pohnpei is rising, as it is rising around all the Pacific islands, a result of the same warming of the climate that is reshaping coastlines around the world. The combination of subsidence and sea level rise means that significant portions of Nan Madol are now permanently or frequently underwater. The canals flood more deeply than they used to. The lower walls of some structures are submerged. The mangroves that have colonised parts of the site in recent centuries are slowly adding their roots to the compression of the artificial foundations. Nan Madol is slowly returning to the sea from which it was built. There is a local legend on Pohnpei about the building of Nan Madol. It involves two brothers, Olisipa and Olosohpa, who came from a distant place and used magic to fly the great stones through the air to their positions in the lagoon. The magic is the explanation for something that still seems barely possible, even with modern knowledge. How did they do it? They must have had something we do not understand. Perhaps they had something simpler. Perhaps they had patience. Perhaps they had generations. Perhaps the thing that looks like magic from the outside is always, on the inside, just an enormous amount of ordinary effort sustained over a very long time. Most of the great things humans have made are like that. Not a single heroic moment of brilliance, but centuries of small efforts accumulating into something that takes your breath away. Nan Madol took your breath away if you saw it at its height. A city on the water, walls of stone rising from the lagoon, canals moving between platforms, the sound of water everywhere, the smell of salt and stone, and the particular warmth of Pacific air. And it is still there, mostly. The walls are still standing, the canals are still there, the mangroves have moved in, and the water is a little higher than it was, and the tourists who visit arrive by small boat and move through the canals in a kind of reverent quiet. That the place seems to demand. The sea built this place in a way by providing the lagoon, the transport routes, the basalt columns from the volcanic coast, and the sea is taking it back, slowly, in the way the sea takes everything, eventually. That is not tragedy, that is just the agreement the world makes with all the things built inside it. You may stand here for a while, you may be magnificent, and then, in time, you will return. For a moment, just breathe. Notice how still everything is around you right now. The night outside your window, doing what night does, being dark and quiet and full of the small sounds that only become audible when the louder world goes to sleep. A distant car, maybe. The settle of the building around you. The sound of your own breathing. You are in your own quiet place, your own shelter, and outside it the world is very large and very old and full of stones that were placed by hands long gone, still standing in lagoons and harbours and shallow seas, patient and unhurried. Nothing is required of you right now. Chapter 15. Thonis Heraclein, the Forgotten Gateway. For a very long time, historians were not entirely sure whether a certain ancient Egyptian city was real. The city appeared in ancient texts. Greek writers mentioned it. It was described as an important port at the mouth of the Nile Delta, a place where ships from the Mediterranean world entered Egypt, paying customs duties, making offerings at. The great temple of the god Amun, beginning their journeys into the land of the pharaohs. The Greeks called it Heraclein. The Egyptians called it Thonis. It seemed, from the references, to have been a major city, perhaps one of the most important harbour cities in the ancient Egyptian world. But no one could find it. Centuries of searching had located nothing. The Nile Delta is a complicated shifting landscape, full of old channels that have moved or silted up, full of land that was once sea and sea that was once land. The city, if it had existed, seemed to have simply disappeared. And then, in 2000, a team led by French underwater archaeologist Frank Goddio, the same man who had explored the sunken royal quarter of Alexandria, was conducting a survey in the Bay of Abukir on the Mediterranean coast of Egypt. Their sonar equipment began returning signals from the seafloor that did not look like natural formations. What they found over the following years of careful excavation was extraordinary. Thonis Heraclein was lying on the seafloor, about 30 to 40 metres below the surface of the Mediterranean, roughly 6 kilometres from the modern coast. It had been there for roughly 1,500 years, since subsidence and possibly a catastrophic collapse of the unstable sediment on which the city was built sent it sliding. Beneath the sea, sometime in the 8th century CE. The site covers an enormous area. The team found over 60 sunken ships, the largest collection of ancient vessels ever found in a single site. They found hundreds of anchors. They found gold coins and weights used for measuring goods at customs. They found ritual objects, bronze figurines of gods, alabaster containers for sacred oils, ritual boats used in religious ceremonies, intricate jewellery, and they found statues. Enormous statues. A colossal red granite statue of the god Hapi, the deity of the Nile flood, standing over 5 meters tall, now lying on the seafloor. A colossal statue of a pharaoh, also in red granite. A colossal statue of a queen or goddess, all of them lying on their sides or faces in the mud. Enormous and silent and preserved in extraordinary detail after 15 centuries in the sea. They found the main temple of the city, the great temple of Amun, the god who was the king of the Egyptian gods, still containing sacred objects, ritual furniture, votive. Offerings placed there by worshippers who had no idea that the sea was coming. The scale of the find was humbling. This was not a small outpost or a minor settlement. This was a great city. A city that had processed enormous amounts of trade, that had been a living centre of commerce and worship for centuries, and it had vanished so completely. That people questioned whether it had ever existed at all, and then it came back. Slowly, piece by piece, lifted from the sediment and brought into the light. There is something in that arc, the forgetting and the remembering, that feels deeply human. We forget things, important things. We lose track of what was real and what was story. We let centuries pile up over the truth until the truth is buried and distant, and we start to wonder if we imagined it. And then, sometimes, someone with a sonar device and a diving suit and a great deal of patience goes looking, and the truth comes back up. Not all truths come back. Not all cities are found. Not all stories are confirmed. Many of the things that were real and important and full of life are simply gone, dissolved into the sediment of time beyond recovery. But some of them are still there. That is the quiet hope at the centre of all of this. That the world keeps things. That the sea keeps things. That in the dark and the cold and the deep there are archives we have not yet opened, stories we have not yet read, lives we have not yet encountered. We are not at the end of history. We are barely at the beginning of understanding it. Chapter 16. Our place in the story. I want to talk to you now about something softer, something less about facts and more about feeling. You have been listening to stories of loss tonight. Cities that went under the water, civilizations that were swallowed by the sea, people who lost their homes, their harbours, their holy places to the slow or sudden rising of the world's oceans. And I want to sit with you in that loss for a moment, not to make you sad, but to let it be what it is. Real. Human. Old. Loss is one of the oldest human experiences. Older than writing. Older than cities. From the very beginning, when the first human communities formed and the first homes were built, there was the possibility of losing them. Fire. Flood. Disease, war, the simple passage of time. Every generation has known what it is to lose something it loved. And every generation has done the same thing with that loss. It has told stories about it. It has woven the lost thing into a narrative, a memory, a myth, a scripture, a song. It has kept the lost thing alive in some form, in the only form available, in language, in symbol, in the way we hold our bodies when we remember, in the particular quality of silence that gathers around certain words. The stories we tell about Doggerland and Alexandria and Helike and Dwarka and Port Royal are doing that work. They are keeping something alive that would otherwise be completely, utterly gone. They are saying, Something was here. People were here. It mattered. You are doing that work too in your life. Every time you remember something, every time you tell a story about someone who is gone, every time you describe a place you loved that has changed or disappeared, you are doing the work that humans have always done. You are refusing to let the water cover everything. It is quiet work. It does not feel heroic. It feels like ordinary talking, ordinary remembering. But it is one of the most profound things our species does. The world is constantly being lost and constantly being kept. Both things are true at once. The sea is rising, and the cities are going under, and the people are moving, and the stories are being told and retold and carried forward into futures that the first tellers could not have imagined. And you are part of that chain. Even tonight, even lying in the dark half asleep, you are receiving these stories. You are adding them to yourself. And someday, in some way you cannot predict, you will pass something of them on. That is enough. More than enough. Sleep reset. Let your body go completely soft now. From the top of your head to the soles of your feet, just let everything release. Let your face relax. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands open. You have been holding on all day. That is what days ask of us. Hold on. Stay present. Manage. Respond. Engage. But the night asks something different. The night asks you to let go. Let go of the day. Let go of tomorrow. Let go of all the things that need doing, and all the things that went wrong, and all the thoughts that circle and circle, without landing anywhere useful. You do not have to think anything right now. You do not have to be anything right now. You are just a breathing person in a dark room, and the world is very old around you, and the sea is somewhere out there doing what it has always done, and everything is right. Now in this exact moment, all right. Everything is all right. Chapter 17. The Islands That Remember. Across the Pacific and Indian Oceans, there are island cultures whose oral traditions carry memories that, when examined carefully, seem to record events that happened thousands of years ago. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia have some of the oldest continuous oral traditions on Earth. Their stories, passed down through generations across tens of thousands of years, describe a time when the coastlines of Australia looked different, when land existed where there is now open sea. Some of these stories describe particular locations in remarkable geographic detail, giving the position of hills and rivers and landmarks that, when compared with maps of what the Australian coast looked like during the last ice age, seem to match the ancient landscape. Researchers have identified at least 21 stories from Australian Aboriginal traditions that appear to describe the flooding of specific coastal locations that would have been dry land between about 7,000 and 18,000 years ago. Stories that describe water coming to cover what was once a plain, or a lake forming where there was none, or islands becoming separated from the mainland. The specificity is startling. These are not generic flood myths. These are stories that describe particular places with enough detail that they can be cross-referenced against the geological record. And when they are, they match. This means that oral tradition, passed from person to person across 100 generations or more, can preserve accurate geographic and historical information for 10,000 years, maybe more. Think about what that means. A grandmother told a story to her grandchildren, and they told it to their grandchildren, and so on for 500 generations, and the story arrived, more or less intact, at the present day. Every person in that chain mattered. every grandmother, every grandchild, every night spent around a fire telling the old stories, every careful repetition of the important details. 500 generations of people who did not know they were preserving ancient geography, who thought they were simply doing what their grandmothers had done, telling the stories that needed to be told. That is one of the most moving things I have ever considered. History is not only in books and ruins and excavated sites. History is in mouths, in memory, in the way stories are told in particular places about particular things that happened there, in tones that carry the weight of something very old even when the words themselves seem simple. In the Pacific Islands, similar patterns emerge. The island groups of Polynesia, Melanesia and Micronesia are full of stories about islands that were once larger, about lands that were once connected, about the sea rising over, places that were once habitable. The Marshallese people have stories about their ancestors living on land that no longer exists. The Hawaiian people have stories about distant homelands beneath the ocean. The traditions of the Maori in New Zealand carry memories of the Great Migration across the Pacific, a journey made possible by navigational knowledge that was itself passed down. Across generations, these cultures lived with the sea as something both life-giving and life-taking. They built their identities at the meeting place of land and water, always aware that the line between them was not fixed, that the sea could give more land through the slow work of coral building up a new reef, or take land away through storm and flood and the slow creep of rising water. They did not fear the sea, exactly. They respected it. They watched it. They told stories about what it had done and what it might do. They paid attention to the long, slow grammar of its movements in a way that most people today, living far from the coast, rarely have occasion to do. There is a lesson in that attention. Not a lesson about preparedness or climate change, though those things matter. A softer lesson, the lesson that the world around you is speaking all the time, in patterns and rhythms and long, slow repetitions, and that if you are still enough, you can hear something of what it is saying. The tide coming in, the tide going out, the way the light changes in a particular place at a particular time of year, the way water finds the lowest point and always moves toward it. These are not just physical facts. They are also something like a language. The language of a world that has been here for a very long time and has a great deal to say. Tonight, you are listening. Maybe not consciously, not anymore. Maybe the listening is happening at the edge of sleep, where words and meanings blur into each other and the story becomes less a sequence of facts and more a quality of feeling. A sense of being held inside something old and vast and fundamentally unhurried. That is the right place to be. That is exactly where you belong. The world turns. The tide moves. The old cities rest in their dark water. And you rest too. Your breath is even. Your body is heavy. The darkness around you is soft and full of nothing that can harm you. Everything that needed doing today has been done, or it will wait, because things wait. The world is patient. It has been practicing patience for 4 billion years. It knows how to wait. And you know how to rest. Let the story continue to move through you, or let it fade into the background, like music in another room, present but not demanding, there if you want it, and gentle if you don't. You have travelled so far tonight, through ice ages and sunken kingdoms and the long, slow memory of coastlines, through waters that hold more history than all the libraries in the world. through the stories of people who lost their cities and carried their memories into new places, who told their children and their children's children about the land the sea had. Taken. Chapter 18. The Slow Forgetting and the Slow Remembering. There is a particular quality to the hour before dawn. If you have ever been awake for it, you will know what I mean. The darkness is at its deepest, but there is something in the air that knows the light is coming. Not yet, not for a while, but coming. The world holds its breath in that hour. The birds are not yet singing. The traffic has not yet begun. Even the wind seems quieter, as if the earth is resting in the last deep moment before it turns its face back toward the sun. That is where we are now, you and I, in the last deep part of this journey. The part that asks nothing of you except the simple, easy work of breathing and letting the words come to you like soft water, like something settling rather than moving like. The final stillness of a lake at the end of a long, windless evening. We have been to so many places tonight, we have touched the edge of so many stories, and I find myself wanting, not to add more facts or visit more cities, but to simply sit with what we have found, to turn it over gently, the way you might turn a smooth stone over in your hand, feeling the weight of it, the temperature of it, the particular way it fits against your palm. The stone is this. The world is very old, older than anything our minds can truly hold. And in that enormous age, humans have been here for only a very short time. And in that short time, we have built and lost and built again, over and over, in every corner of the world, in every climate and landscape and geography available to us. We built on coastlines because coastlines are generous. They give fish and trade routes and clean air and the kind of beauty that makes people want to stay. And the coastline shifted. The sea rose. The land subsided. The earthquakes came. The floods came. And the cities went under, some slowly, some quickly, but all of them completely. All of them permanently. And what remains? The stones remain. The bones remain. The pottery remains. The stopped watches and the corroded bronze mechanisms and the harpoon points in lumps of peat pulled up in fishing nets. The outlines of streets on the seafloor. The columns pitted with mollusk holes that recorded a history no human witnessed. The sacred objects thrown into cenotes by hands that believed completely in what they were doing. All of it remains, in the dark and the cold and the patient sea, and the stories remain. That is the most extraordinary thing. The stories travel further than anything else, further than stone in a way, because stone can be buried too deep to find. But a story, once it is moving, is very hard to stop. It changes shape, it sheds details and gains new ones. It becomes mythology, then scripture, then legend, then the vague memory of a thing someone's grandmother used to say, but something in it persists. Something essential, the emotional core, the shape of what happened. The water came, the land went under, the people moved, and they told their children about the land that was lost. That story is everywhere. Every culture has it, in some form. And perhaps that is because it really happened, to all of us, to all of our ancestors, in one way or another, at one time or another. The sea really did come. The land really was lost. The memory really was carried forward across 10,000 years of human mouths and human nights and human children asking their grandmothers to tell the story again. We are the result of that carrying. We are what the story became when it kept moving long enough. For a moment, just breathe. A long, slow breath, all the way in until your chest is full, and then let it go, all of it, slowly, completely, until you are empty and still. And then breathe again. Naturally, without effort, letting your body do what it knows to do. You are doing beautifully. Chapter 19. What the water keeps. I want to tell you about one more thing the sea keeps. Something smaller than a city, something more personal. In 1991, a melting glacier in the Alps, on the border between Austria and Italy, revealed the body of a man who had been frozen in the ice for more than 5,000 years. He is called Tsi, or the Iceman, and he is one of the most studied human beings in history. Tsi was not swallowed by the sea. He was swallowed by ice and snow and the slow, cold accumulation of a glacier moving over him on a mountain pass. But the principle is the same. He was preserved by something cold and airless and indifferent. And what emerged 5,000 years later was extraordinary. Not just his body, though the preservation of his body was remarkable in itself, but the things he carried. He had a copper axe, one of the finest copper axes found from that era, suggesting he was a person of some status. He had a bow that was not yet finished, still being made. He had arrows, some finished and some not. He had a fire-lighting kit with fungus that works well as tinder. He had dried meat and fruit and grains for food. He had a coat made of different animal skins, carefully chosen for their specific properties, different furs for different parts of the garment. He had shoes with a sophisticated insulating design, grass packed inside leather and mesh, that some researchers have said is more thermally efficient than some modern boot. Designs. He was, in other words, a person. A specific, competent, resourceful, walking through the mountains person with a to-do list that included finishing his bow and getting somewhere before nightfall. He never got there. Something happened to him on that pass. We know he was shot with an arrow and likely died of that wound, and he fell, and the snow covered him, and 5,000 years passed. And then the glacier gave him back. I think about Tsi sometimes as a kind of ambassador from deep time, not a ruler or a priest or a warrior of great renown, just a person, with shoes and a lunch and an unfinished project, moving through his world with purpose and competence, and the ordinary human assumption that there would be a tomorrow. There is great tenderness in that. There is great tenderness in all of these stories, I think, if you look for it. The tenderness is in the ordinary details. The stopped watch at 11:43. The unfinished bow. The harpoon point lost in a bog. The sacred objects arranged carefully in a temple that no one knew was about to go under the sea. The grandmother telling her grandchildren about the land that was lost. These are not the stories of heroes. They are the stories of people. People who ate and slept and worried and loved and built things and lost things and got up the next morning and tried again. People exactly like you. People exactly like everyone you have ever known. And the cold and the dark and the deep water kept fragments of them. Kept enough that we can, across 5,000 or 10,000 or 15,000 years, recognize them, feel something toward them. Say quietly, you were here. I see that you were here. That matters. You are here right now. That matters too. If your eyes are closed, keep them closed. If your breathing has gone slow and deep, let it stay that way. If the story has become a soft background hum, a presence rather than a sequence of words, that is exactly right. That is where we are now, the quiet end of a long journey. the moment before the music fades completely. There is nothing more you need to do tonight. Chapter 20. The Sea at Night. Somewhere in the world right now it is daytime. The sun is high, the light is sharp, and people are going about the full, loud, complicated business of their lives. But somewhere else, right now, it is exactly like where you are. Dark, quiet, the middle of the night, or the edge of it, or the deep part of it. Someone is lying in a bed like yours. Someone is breathing the same slow breath. Someone is between waking and sleeping. In that soft borderland where the mind lets go of its grip on the day and begins to drift toward whatever the night holds. We are not alone in this. We are never alone in this. Across the world tonight, millions of people are falling asleep, slowly, one by one and in great waves. As the darkness moves around the planet, people are letting go of consciousness and drifting down into the warm, dark, necessary country of sleep. It happens every night. It has happened every night since the very first human being lay down and closed their eyes under whatever sky was above them, in whatever shelter they had made. Sleep is the oldest human ritual, older than prayer, older than fire in a way. Because even before we had fire, we had sleep. We lay down in the dark and we let go, and we trusted that the world would still be there when we woke up. And it was. It always was. The sun came back. The day returned. The world was still there. That trust is so deep in us that we barely notice it anymore. We do not lie down at night and consciously decide to trust the world. We just lie down. The trust is built into the act, into the body, into the oldest part of us. You are doing that right now. You are performing the oldest ritual. You are part of the longest continuous practice in human history. Every person who has ever lived has done this exact thing. Lain down, breathed slowly, let the day go. Trusted the dark. That is a kind of communion. A quiet, invisible communion with every human being who has ever breathed. The sea is doing something similar tonight. The tides are moving as they always move, in their long, slow response to the gravity of the moon. In and out. In and out. The rhythm that has been going on since the moon was young and the earth was younger, since long before there were any creatures to hear it, since long before there were any. Shores to define the meeting of water and land. The tide does not know you are listening, but you are. And in that listening, in that small act of awareness, something passes between you and the world. Something that does not need a name. Feel it now if you like. The slow pull and release. The water moving somewhere out in the dark world, moving because the moon is pulling it, and the earth is spinning, and the whole enormous system of gravity and motion is doing what it has always done. And you are here, breathing, resting, safe. Chapter 21. The Last Light of Lost Cities. There is a thing that happens with light, with the light from distant stars. When you look at a star in the night sky, you are not seeing the star as it is now. You are seeing it as it was when the light you are seeing left it, which might be years ago, or hundreds of years ago, or thousands of years ago, depending on how far away the star is. The light travelled all that way to reach your eyes, and the journey took time, and during that time, things may have changed. The star may have shifted, it may have dimmed, In some cases, the star may no longer even exist. What you are seeing when you look at a distant star is the past. A message sent a long time ago, travelling through the dark, arriving at your eyes right now. The lost cities are something like that. The light they sent out, the stories, the artifacts, the outlines on the seafloor is reaching us now, across thousands of years of distance. The cities themselves are gone, or changed beyond recognition, or lying in the dark beneath fathoms of cold water. But their light is still travelling, still arriving, still touching the people who are willing to look. Frank Goddio diving in the harbour of Alexandria, Robert Ballard's cameras moving through the dark of the Black Sea, the fisherman of the North Sea pulling up a lump of ancient peat with a harpoon point inside it, the archaeologists carefully brushing sediment from the streets of Pavlopetri, the Aboriginal elder telling a story about the land before the water came, all of them receiving light that was sent a very long time ago. And you tonight receiving it too. You have been listening to these stories, and now they are part of you. Part of your memory, however softly, however loosely. The names may fade, the specific details may blur, but something of the feeling will stay. Something of the understanding that the world is older and deeper than our daily lives suggest. Something of the tenderness for all the ordinary people who built their homes at the edge of the water and did not know the water was coming. That tenderness is not sadness. Let me be clear about that one more time. It is something warmer than sadness, something more like love, the way you can love something that is gone, the way you can feel genuine warmth toward people you have never met and will never meet, simply because they were human, and being human is enough. You know what it is to be human. You know it from the inside the way no history book can describe it. You know the feeling of waking up in the morning and planning your day, the feeling of hunger and warmth and cold, and the particular joy of a good night's sleep after a hard day. The feeling of making something with your hands. The feeling of loving someone. The feeling of loss. All of those feelings are ancient. All of them were felt by the people of Doggerland and Alexandria and Helike and Pavlopetri and Nan Madol and Port Royal. All of them are felt tonight by the sleeping millions on the other side of the world. All of them are in you, right now, as you drift towards sleep. For a moment, just breathe. One last slow breath. In and out. Let your whole body soften with the exhale. Let everything you are carrying just rest, just for tonight, just until morning. You do not have to hold anything right now. The sea is holding everything. Chapter 22. Drifting down. This is where we slow to almost nothing. The stories are told. The cities have been visited. The water has covered everything that needed covering, and the dark is complete, and the only sound now is your breathing and whatever small sounds the night makes around you. I want to walk you down, very gently, towards sleep. Imagine you are in clear water, not deep, cold ocean water. Warm water. A shallow, sunlit sea, the kind you have seen in pictures or dreams or memories of places that felt like paradise. The water is the colour of aquamarine, that blue-green that does not seem like it should exist in nature, but does. It absolutely does. The light comes through it in long shifting columns, the way sunlight moves through water, always moving, always changing, always making the world below seem like it is breathing. You are not sinking. You are floating downward very gently, very slowly, the way a leaf falls through still air, rocking side to side with the smallest imaginable movement. The water is warm around you. It holds you completely, from every direction, a full and total embrace. Below you, in the soft blur of deeper water, there are shapes, stone shapes, the outlines of walls, the smooth rounded edges of ancient things worn soft by years and years of water moving over them. They are not threatening. They are just there, the way old things are just there, patient and permanent and asking nothing. You drift down toward them. Slowly. So slowly. And they stay where they are, and the water holds you. And the light filters down in its long shifting columns, and everything is very quiet and very warm and very safe. This is the feeling of deep time. This is what it feels like to be small and held and part of something that will continue long after you have rested and woken and gone about all the days of your life and finally rested again for the last time. This is not a frightening thing. This is the most natural thing. You are part of the world. You always have been. You always will be. The atoms in your body are ancient, genuinely ancient, forged in stars that died before the sun was born. They have been part of the ocean. They have been part of stone. They have been part of creatures that no longer exist. And now they are you, reading this moment, feeling this warmth, breathing this breath. And when you are done being you, they will be something else. Something that cannot be predicted. Something that the deep future will hold, the way the sea holds the old stones, quietly, without ceremony, without announcement. That is not a sad thing. Say it one more time slowly. That is not a sad thing. It is the agreement. It is the nature of things. And within that agreement, within the enormous arc of matter becoming one thing and then another, there is this, right now. You, warm, breathing, real. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is, in every honest sense of the word, everything. The warmth of your bed is the warmth of the world. The weight of your body pressing into the mattress is the weight of something real and here and alive. The darkness behind your closed eyes is soft and full and safe. You have nothing to do now. Nothing to be. No story left to follow. The story is done, or it will wait, and either way you are allowed to let it go. The sea is somewhere out in the dark world, moving in and out with the tide, the way it has always moved, the way it will always move, long after the buildings on its shore have gone to rubble, and the rubble has gone to sand, and the sand has gone to stone, and the stone has gone back into the deep earth where it came from. And in the quiet and the dark of all those future years, somewhere, somehow, the light of this moment is still travelling. The light of you, lying here, breathing, resting, being. It is going somewhere. It always is. Everything always is, but for now, there is only this. The warmth. The dark. The breath. In. And out. Thank you for travelling with me tonight. Thank you for listening for as long as you listened, and for sleeping for as long as you slept. You did not need to follow every word. You did not need to remember any of it. The journey was enough. The being here was enough. The lost cities are resting in their waters, patient and unhurried. The harpoon point is in its museum case. The stopped watch reads 11:43. The columns in Pozzuoli stand with their mollusk-bitten lower halves in the Italian evening. The stones of Pavlopetri are smooth in the shallow turquoise water. The streets of Thonis Heraclion lie in the Mediterranean dark, quiet and complete and full of the long, slow grace of things that have been released from time. And you are resting too, in the old, kind dark, safe, warm. Here, just here. That is all. That is everything. Good night.